Okay,
All right.
great.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. I'm your host, Mystic Mark. And with me today is a very special guest. If you're a fan of the Donut Factory, then you definitely know this gentleman. He and I have done a couple podcasts together with our mutual friend Donut, but never have we done a show, the two of us. So finally, we're making it happen. The great Ani Osaru is joining us here on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. And if you don't know what Ani gets into on his YouTube channel, you're in for a treat today, folks. We're going to be diving into some topics that I personally love, and I think it's been too long since we've gotten into a conversation quite like this on the show. So before we do that, Ani, welcome. Thank you for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your channel, and let's kick this thing off.
Yes, thank you so much for allowing me to be on today. Let me just say I'm very much a fan of your podcast. I play it at work. Your podcast, Donuts podcast, Juan's podcast, and a couple of other people who's, into this research, of uncovering symbolism, history, in reference to the esoteric, occult knowledge, secret societies, things that people, either say is wacky or people really want to know about. You guys do an excellent job. I get something from each and every one of you, and I appreciate you for inviting me on, and we finally can get this, done, and we can start, a series, hopefully, and do more things in the future. But yeah, you've been doing excellent research. I think I got onto your podcast when the author of the Gaia Matrix. Did you have the Gaia Matrix
Peter
author
Shampoo.
on?
Yes, I did.
He,
Peter's
he
the
was
best.
wonderful. He was Peter Shampoo.
Yep.
Peter Shampoo. That was very enlightening in my research and his research. And also the skull and bones research you've been doing has been excellent as well.
Wow.
But yeah, I've been looking forward to this. Yeah, my name's Ani Osaru. I go by that. I've been doing research for about 10 years into occultism, metaphysics, and esotericism. I consider myself a metaphysicist, just uncovering the subtle energies that you can't see with the physical eyes, the symbolism connected through ancient civilizations up to today, to these secret societies that's, connected all together in one folder or another, or egregores, or whatever you want to call it, astral groups of workings behind the scenes that's running, quote unquote, the world, or at least the symbolism that people don't pay attention to is in everything, is in every single aspect of what you're looking at. If you can understand it, the sacred geometry, the gematria, the mythos of where it comes in different areas and regions, it has been a very much interest to me. So I picked up the torch from the people who taught me, like the Bobby Hemmett's, the C. Freemanel, Dr. Phil Valentine's, late Lalila, Africa, Baba Kalindi. These people started research way in the 80s, 70s, 90s and stuff. And I would listen to their videos, and I kind of wanted to introduce a new form of some things they were looking into and unveil it to the world. I'm the author of the book, The Blueprint of Darkness, on Amazon, writing about the melanogenesis of light, how darkness has been stigmatized and is actually a crucial factor to everything in the production of photons and, quantum physics and everything. So I look into the physics of darkness very much. And we just research. We just love research. We love talking about different topics. I don't really fall on one side, of the fence of what I get into, but they would call me the overly top woo type of person, because I may get into the understanding of the magic and the intricacies of metaphysics, as far as meditation, the chakras, the bioenergy fields, and that aspect. But I put it in a way that's unique, and I try to offer that to give new insight to people.
I love it. Yeah, I've bear witness to it, and it's some really incredible stuff. The deep dives you go into, and it's funny. we weren't necessarily planning on talking about this, at least I wasn't, but I had a conversation with Mark Gober recently, and the topic of dark matter came up. So I'm curious, what's your perspective on dark matter? Maybe the term, as I understand it, is a little different than how you understand it, maybe. I don't know. But from our understanding and from what Mark Gober told us, dark matter is this very sort of intangible thing that even scientists have a hard time explaining. And maybe there are spiritual reasons for that. That's just my suspicion. But
Mhm.
tell us about dark matter and how you decided to write a book about this, because it seems like there's some deeper implications here that go beyond just quarks and physics and string theory.
Yeah, it is. And the quarks, the physics, and the string theory is very interesting. And it supports the esoteric and metaphysical half of it, the spiritual half, because I believe the Egyptians, the Babylonians, Sumerians, they were giving characters, describing in stories with the characters how these forces, like invisible forces pertaining to dark matter and quantum aspects of particles and atoms moving, how it shapes the physical world is put into another type of understanding and symbolism that people mistake and think just because you see a crocodile headed guy, some type of anthropomorphic figure that is talking about literal people walking around with animal heads, but they're actually describing some physics stuff if you look deeper into it. I like Dr. Joseph Farrell's research into some of these things, and the sempiternality and plasma is connected to it as well. But as far as dark matter and the conception of how I look at it metaphysically, and from an occult aspect, I think it's a compression state of everything around us, the invisible energy, the ether, all of these aspects. It's like a medium for it to move through. And I think it is birthing, the aspects of what different levels of light is, because we have physical light, and they describe in some occult texts, there's light that's above that. Even Ashihana Dean's book and research talks about these higher light fields that comes out of the kanoma, or what's called the void in Gnosticism. It's the same thing as dark matter to me. I believe that darkness within itself is the quintessential factor to spirituality in its entirety. Just for you to go to sleep, you have to close your eyes and go into a very dark state and slow down the biorhythm so the alpha waves, beta waves, theta waves can interact and propagate whatever imaging that you have in astral planes. And I think every plane of existence and dimension, the dark matter is like the glue between it. And I look at it as a melanosis. Melanin, when I was speaking about it on Thomas and Donut's show a couple of weeks ago, is actual the physical or chemistry aspect of what dark matter is to the cosmos. With its interacting with the stars, it's an absorber, and it's an electromagnetic absorber, and it produces kinetic potential, which is what chaos does. Chaos is a kinetic potential producer, and chaos was at the beginning in all mythologies. You look at it across the board. Even the Bible said that God's face moved upon the face of the deep, the darkness, and all of these aspects. So everything comes out of this melanogenesis, and is malign and is hidden because I believe if they give us the actual metaphysical unveilings of it, that it's going to get people on a way higher vibration to understand what's actually happening and what transpired in ancient civilizations with subtle energies.
Right. And this is a crossroad we come to at many points throughout the show with many different subjects. We realize that there are gatekeepers who, for worse or for better, sometimes it seems like it's because they have our best interests in mind, like shepherds, But other times it's very obvious that this is an economic or political vantage point that they can hold over us by keeping the majority of us in ignorance to these realities, or just at least, obscuring them to the point where you have to be in their academic echo chambers for more than a
Mhm.
decade to completely, get it. And by then they've sunk their teeth so far into you, there's no hope. I mean, look at a guy like Bill Nye the Science Guy, or Neil
Mhm.
deGrasse Tyson. I mean, they have kind of made a mockery of what science actually is when they dismiss so flippantly anything occult, anything esoteric. These guys are just champions of dogma. And what I understand about this perspective that we share is that there is a scientific approach to the esoteric that almost, it's like a key that unlocks a portion of your mind or your soul, that then you enter a room with more keys and more locks, right? And you just keep unlocking things, right? So
Mhm.
let's go back to this, where you start with all this, because you named a couple of people that I'm unfamiliar with who were
Mhm.
maybe key mentors for you in this process, people whose research you studied. When we're looking at the grand history of what it is to be human, like, where do you start? Obviously not you as Ani, but like, where do you wrap your head around us as human beings? Like, where should we start with this whole topic?
I believe strongly where my research is moving into is dimensionality. So we're talking dimensions. And I believe that the earth was always here. It was just in another dimension before it was in the physical dimension. And once you get the hominids and everything, it was a production. If you look into Manly P. Hall's book, he talks about the seven root races, which the teachers who taught me, they spoke highly about understanding the seven root races. It even says that we have two more states to go through in evolution as a human. So we're not even finished. Say we're supposed to acquire another spinal cord, and that connects to the Freemasonic, the two pillars in that aspect. And the final state is we're supposed to disappear entirely back into, the other dimension we came out of. So there's a lot of things people don't look into, like the if you want to say the beginning, they talk about the pudding bag body. We were just pineal, abstract beings, barely legs. I think it was always here, but it wasn't fully in the vibration at the time when we entered the planet, or maybe the vibratory of the planet wasn't right for it to become visible, fully. And then as the vibration slowed down, then we slowly became these shells that we call bodies. But prior, we are these etherical, this essence coming from a completely different dimension that kind of fell into a lower vibration. And after falling into the vibration, it it um it developed these codes genetically that we have to follow, the laws. They call it hermetic laws, or these universal laws. Whereas when we were in this other state, there were different laws, higher hyperdimensional laws. That's big in my research. Hyperdimensionality that we can't fathom really in the physics. Whatever physics you're looking into, we're trying to understand it. There's a lot of research and books on it. I've been looking at books. So some of the physicists, their imagination allows for them to expand and give us an insight of what these laws can look like, or how it can pertain. That's how they started naming how many dimensions it was, like 11 to 27, bosonic physics and things of that aspect. But overall, we were in a spiritual, a non-physical realm, and we entered a low vibratory state, and we slowly integrated into these moving, uh, what you would call cookie cutter moving pieces of physical matter a slower state than what we were vibratory before we got here, pretty much.
Right.
It's my understanding.
Well said. I love this as a jumping off point for this conversation because, again, the juxtaposition of scientific rational thought and an open-minded spiritual recognition of humanity's truth, right? Because we are not these material reductionist beings. That's the symptom of the dimensionality that we're currently in. So
Right.
trying to reverse engineer, for lack of a better term, our origins from where we are now, it's very difficult because we're not in that same vibrational state. So everything that you look at as far as modern human output reflects that denser vibration, material sciences and things like that. And you can make the argument that, we're heading into the digital age, and maybe this is an indication of that density starting to soften, and we're maybe pendulum swinging towards
Hmm.
that higher vibration again. But the point is this is a process of evolution. I'm sure you're familiar with Hieronymus Bosch, the painter, the Dutch painter. Have you ever seen Hieronymus Bosch's triptych painting? It might be more recognizable by its image than his name. He's kind
Yeah.
of got quite a mouthful. So I'm going to share the image for you
Okay.
because Manly P. Hall and other writers use this painting as a example of what you just described, the transition from a lighter state of being to a denser state of being, and how the earth has been sort of like um, you know, the medium that's sort of taken us through these stages. But hold on, let me share my screen. I'll try to do
Okay.
it so that the audience will see it too. Let me know when we're live here. All right, we should be able to see it now. So
Yes, I can see it.
so this one here on the side, I don't know that we're gonna get a great because now it's all blurry. But hold on, let me try. Let me try again. Um, Open image in new tab. Let's see how that goes. All right, perfect. So what we're seeing here on the left is this higher vibrational state of the earth, obviously very abstract with the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve. And then this is sort of like a departure from that into maybe whatever came before our current, maybe not current era, but Bosch's era, which he symbolized like this. So this was the Dark Ages, the densest form of matter, and it kind of just looks like chaos. You see people are like
Hmm.
blending with physical objects, and there's a huge knife coming out of these ears, which I think was his way of saying music sucked in his time period.
Right.
But yeah, there's an argument here that kind of follows suit with what you described, that we are esoterically aware of this great history, and science kind of lies to us about, our origins and our history to give us maybe a denser version of it, right? It's not that it's totally false, it's just this dense version of history. So, yeah, what do you think about this Hieronymus Bosch painting?
I think it's very interesting. I've seen something similar to this. I want to
Probably seen
research
zoom
it. I
ins
want
of
to
it.
look more into it. I want to take my time and look more into it. But from what you said, I absolutely agree that it is a record that there was an understanding that these frequencies could have been denser. And yeah, they condense the information, like with astrology, Western astrology, they really just highlight the ego and how it views itself and how the world views itself. Whereas you look into sidereal astrology, I think modern astrologists kind of took sidereal from the East and made it more simplistic, which takes out factors that are critical to understanding the bigger picture of what you are, pertaining to the stars, pertaining to the transits of where the planets are. Same thing with information in science, same thing with them hiding information from us. They give us mixed truth and put a little bit falsified stuff. But the leaving out of it, if I'm trying to build a vehicle and I leave out the radiator, I'm not going nowhere, unless I find another way that equivalently can do how a radiator functions, which is what we're trying to do when we're putting the pieces together with shows like this, is trying to find the functionality of what was missed through our education system of what we have, because I talk to people all over the world. I mean, everyone has a lot of questions
Right.
about what's real, where did these concepts come from, why are we in a paradigm so egotistical and very vile behavior, and corporations controlling things, banking systems. Why does it have to be this way? How did it get this way? And you got to go to some people that's not deemed, highly known in academia, or highly maligned or ostracized because of how they speak. And like you said, if I watched Terrence Howard interview, he was explaining some stuff. He didn't know what he was talking about in some instances. So they brought this math wizard on, this guy. He's like a math professor at Harvard or Princeton or something. And he was explaining, he said, hey, I'm trying to help you out, because when it comes to academia, when you said what you said, just now, that's like me putting a knife in your gut. Like that's like, he said, I'm trying to save you from them, doing that to you, because we want you to be successful. And that's how I look at it. And when you say gatekeepers, these people know, and they are trying to censor how much of the information gets out, and they can easily turn and make somebody look wacky, whereas they may not have the full picture, but they could be on to something. But they can, at an instant, at a whim, put out propaganda, use the left wing, right wing, all of these different things, and censor someone who speaks a little sense about what's actually happening. And we have to be aware spiritually intact to not believe everything the mass media and popularity of how we look at things can stop us sometimes from uncovering the real truth.
Right. Right. It's like they're willing to accept people entertaining these ideas, but from controlled perspectives. If you're not controlled, you're a whack job, you're crazy, you're a lunatic. But yeah, the academic perspective is very much one of gatekeeping. But at the same time, you see this information filtered through certain religious organizations, and the same effect is garnered in some ways. So what we're really looking at is a true esoteric pattern of information. And there's your son. Hey, what's up, buddy? What we're looking at is a deeper pattern of esoteric information that's informing all of these systems, but they have a prerogative to censor it for their own gain, and to allow, maybe certain people who are willing to play ball or follow their rules to be privileged to the information. But I've heard you on one of your live streams say that the fallen angels are not the Nephilim, they're us. We are the fallen angels. We have fallen. And I'd love to sort of get into that. Does that fit into the seven root races theory, where not theory, but that, there was a series of iterations of human beings, and at one point in our history, something happened where we chose, or through maybe consequence of our actions, fell into this denser version of the earth. Is this along those
Yeah,
lines?
yeah, you're hitting on it. of course, Nephilim means fallen, or it means something that fell. And we get wrapped up just on the giantism aspect because it's sensationalized within the metaphysical occult community. I'm not going to say that there weren't giants, and whether you want to call them Nephilim or not. I think that there's a esoteric understanding, a exoteric understanding, and there's a metaphorical. There's metaphors as well, and there's different descriptions of uncovering the mystery. But I think the main esoteric understanding of what the Nephilim is light or angels falling down to a lower state. They create the narrative of the hell and the underworld aspect. But if you read a lot of mythology, you will figure out that the underworld is either the earth or is in the earth, if you don't believe that. So this is the underworld. It used to be called Korra. That's where the word core comes from. It was a goddess. Is the core, the earth. You think of the core, you think of a place where, to some imagination, that's where hell is. It's a very hot place. You have hollow earth theory as well, that there's more dimensions underground. You get into that theory. So I believe that we were in another dimension. And this dimension, from a Gnostic perspective, because I love looking at the Gnostic history, it explains a lot of things that's left out in the Judaic, the Christian, and or the three Abrahamic religions. It predates all of them, and had a back and forth with some Orthodox Christians. Very funny thing, but I can show you Gnosticism in Sumeria with Tiamat and the fall of her children, her and Kingu, which is where the word king comes from. It's from Kingu, her husband or her mate. And I could show you it in Typhonia, which is pre-Egypt, before you get 32 dynasties. In Egypt, they had schools way before Alexandria, Timbuktu, and these things, and there's books written on it. People just don't want to pick it up and read it. Whereas the Draconian is nothing but the Typhonian is a person who has knowledge of the stars, and it was a time frame where the Draco constellation, which was called the Mother Typhon, was the main pole region where the zodiac was rotating around that particular area in the sky. So the watchers, the Nephilim, the giants, they called them that because they had immense insight into the spiritual world by studying the position of where we were on the earth comparative to these pole regions in the stars. And that's when people had polar symbolism and polar worship during that time frame, and then it split off later into sun and moon worship. So before we even get the sun worshiping dynasties, the sun gods or the moon gods, we had polar gods, really. And it was more androgynous from a Gnostic perspective. So how the Gnostics is describing it, we come from an androgyne aeon. Speaking dimensionality, there's a rim before this rim. And just like how we have polarity here, we have masculine and feminine. In this aeon or dimension, there was no masculine and feminine. They were together as an androgyne, different laws, different things. And they were pure energy. They weren't physical yet. And then they speak about in Gnosticism this fall of something called the spark that passes down these other aeons until it gets to one specific one called Sophia, which is the same as Mary in the Bible, Isis in the Egyptian texts, Tiamat, whatever main matrilinear figure we have in mythologies. She makes a great mistake where she has a child without her other half, her masculine half. So she's not doing the same steps of these androgyne aeons before her that have a compatibility of the masculine and feminine, and she ends up birthing a being who doesn't have the full nourishment as the other aeons produce in their offspring. So her offspring is this particular being that doesn't have the full nourishment or light that these other aeon does, and this being is ignorant of it not having that. So it begins to blindly create cookie cutter dimensions that we call the physical. And the light from these other aeons starts to get trapped in that dimension he creates. And he says, I am a jealous God. There will be no God before me. Bow to me. I am God. So this is the birth of man and woman's ego. Cosmically, there's the ego. Then we get our own ego. Then our ego splits. We got a dystonia, then we have the false ego. So it's just a fractalizing of a fractalizing of a fractalizing. And we used to be whole. Our soul used to be together. That's why when you have sex, it's a reminder from the cosmos that when your souls merge together, you used to be one. That's why it feels so good. That was a state we were always in at one point. And the fallen angels, they're called the pre-Adamites. It was a state in paradise where the vibratory level once again was different, and we were in harmony with each other as one. Then matter starts to get more denser and denser. And then we have to split from that harmonizing and become separate mirroring. We're looking at each other's reflection now in this state of polarity. And the first beings that probably came out of that dimension were called that. They still had great immense knowledge and they passed it down. So once we get into the dynasties of these civilizations, this is way removed from what I'm talking about. The people they called the Nephilim or Watchers was way back to the point I'm talking about in paradise. They had knowledge of these things. So the people who didn't have that knowledge, they called them giants, or they called them people of great, immense information and insight into these things that's unfathomable. So it's a mix up, a misstrewing, and a fractalizing where we get so far removed and we're obsessed with the sensationalism now. Everybody wants to talk about Anunnaki, Nephilim, these things. And I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that. We want to understand these things, but there's an echo chamber in it as well. So we need to look at other angles of light. And before we dismiss it, let's do the research and look through it and see if we can come up with something.
Ani, you are speaking my language, bro. I really appreciate it because my education on these subjects came through Manly P. Hall, Mark Booth, who, arguably this was channeled information, but essentially the world of channeled information, the new age maybe has put a sort of stain on a lot of this type of information. And unfortunately, we hear a lot of what end up being Christian fundamentalist points of view on the Nephilim, on the Anunnaki, and all these other subjects that are so sophisticated and nuanced. And there's just so much propaganda around it. Even the alien obsession, I think, detracts from the entire conversation, which is an inner conversation, the one where we realize we are inherently connected to this story, right? This is, I think, the major takeaway from what we've talked about so far. And I've heard you talk about this in your live streams, reawakening our imaginative abilities, We talk about things like clairaudience, clairvoyance, cognizance,
Mhm.
these, abilities that people in certain special circumstances, or people who maybe have had special events happen in their life that have awoken these events for worse and for better. Sometimes those are traumatizing events where people awaken their clair abilities. But I'm curious where you see these abilities and how this fits into your worldview, because it seems like the Gnostic perspective says that at some point or another we were either tricked or chosen, elected ourselves to become a part of this dense material existence. Yet in that, there's sort of like a catch 22, because, and now we talk about it like blue pill, red pill, but it kind of goes beyond just red pill and being aware of the truth. It's almost like a recognition that you have to dedicate yourself to that, to experience maybe what it was like to be in that other realm beforehand while you're still here, to take that with you into the material existence, not to just say, oh, well, the material existence is bad, so screw it and live a hedonistic life. And, we're trapped here, so let's just, kill the prison warden and raise hell, right? Like, it seems like people kind of dismiss Gnosticism when really Gnosticism isn't saying that at all. It's saying,
No.
bring the heaven that is a part of you into you here,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
let's start to get into this, because I feel like you already are way ahead of me in your understanding of this, and I'm not just saying that because you're the guest here.
Yeah, well, that's one hell of a question. um, I love the way you put things. Man, that was great. Yeah, bringing it inside yourself. The kingdom was always inside. The church isn't where the building is. The church is where the people are, and inside of the people is where the kingdom is. So the people is where the church is, and that's why I asked a lot of questions coming up in my Christian faith, because I still consider myself Gnostic Christian. A lot of people get mad at that, but the Gnostics were talking about the Christos, or the Chrysomelnos, way before a Christian or later denominations were speaking about this. They were speaking about an internal light, a seed of light that comes from this particular area where the transcendental God that's above the matter of physical exists. And the physical is more like a cocoon. You can look at it as just like a butterfly going into the cocoon. The soul is reincarnating in and out of the cocoon through our lineages. So these spiritual lineages and these physical genetic lineages is preparing a alchemical process of the soul to become what the Jewish faith calls the tikkun, which is the restoration of the kingdom, the light kingdom that the Zoroastrians and the Mandeans were speaking about, Zervin, this light realm. There's different areas of light that has to come down here, and it has to go through the shadow, the darkness of being in dense matter and form, and the trauma. And the that is a compression, it's a compactification. How are stars born? Dark matter squeezes on itself until there's a kaboom. And the kaboom becomes these cymatic uh, entities. I call them entities. They're not even balls of fire, how we thought of them as kids. These are living, sentient things that has a lot of effect on our consciousness and how our consciousness is directed in areas. And they're studying this. The elite is studying that as well. They have a lot of books. They have books on the cosmic predator hierarchies. A lot of these things, they got the first tarot deck was on that. The Solobusca deck was actually on the the game of Saturn, how to reincarnate back into a elite bloodline studying the stars and keep being the managerial class over humanity. They got to do these obscene rites to connect with the predator cosmically to become the predator here. But to answer your question, with activating abilities, clairalience, claircognizance, all of these things, your imagination is what the soul's consciousness works through imagination. This is why, as a child, you're more open to your destiny's path than you are as a adult. It gets more narrow. You start to tell yourself, "Why I'm not capable of doing that," or other people are telling you, "I'm not capable of thinking like that or doing that. You should be this way. This is what you're best at." As a child, is wide open. You could be whatever you want to be because the imagination had just came out of that realm, that pre-physical realm, that spiritual realm, and the door is still open, which means kinetic potentiality is way more open and expansive for you to direct whatever your frequency is going to be as you develop and grow. So I'm teaching a particular process. I've created systems, whereas we utilize different tools and different techniques spiritually to potentiate our DNA and access light codes so that our abilities come online and can help us. There was a time frame when we were in hominid form. There's a book on it. It's by a woman. I can't remember her name, but it's on the bicameral mind. Way back then, they talked about it in Westworld, if you see that show. But way back then, we used to be able to hear God. We used to be able to hear. I'm talking about the Gnostic demiurge God. And he would literally, it would be like a voice in your head. You could hear this, whatever this cosmic source of all life and energy here say things. I'm not saying it was in English or it was in a particular language, but they understood. It could speak directly to them, even in nature. It would give directions to you. Later on, vibrational density, it becomes the intuitive voice in us. It's a whisper now. So there's things that different metaphysicists are developing to potentiate your DNA, so that opens up the light codes back up and you're able to tap into that imaginative source that you had as a child. And now you can expand your kinetic potential. And not only that, you can integrate yourself more into that spiritual realm. And as you do that, going to sleep, I talk about dream physics and the correlations of the lattices of chains of divine fields. The tachyons is what they call it in physics, dealing with that energy and building up while doing these exercises. What happens is the source of what we come from begins to amalgamate itself into you. So you're no longer caring about the physical things. You're living a magical life. Every instance to you becomes a different lesson on a much more higher esoteric understanding than you just function going to work and making sure this thing is in order before your manager gets there. You become your own manager and you're managing how life is going to be a lesson to you. And you utilize it all. The astrology, the sidereal astrology. I give sidereal readings and show people their Shakti. It's a Sanskrit word where there's a Shakti in each of the sidereal nakshatras, which are fixed stars, the lunar mansions of how the moon passes through. And within those nakshatras, there's a deity that has a Shakti, a power. They have a superpower, like how we see in the Marvel DC comic books. Each of these superheroes have a superpower. You do as well. But it's a spiritual or a physical interaction of a power Somebody may have the power of luck. You ever had a friend that somehow they just luck up and they get things? Or somebody else may have a power of creativity. Somebody else may have a power of whatever it is. I can look into your chart and show you what that deity's Shakti is. And when you read that deity's mythology, you'll notice that some of the patterns within its story is comparative to instances in your life. It's all one big holographic strip, and we're playing the characters out in our different modes.
Well said. You're giving me flashbacks, and I try to remove myself as much as possible from the show as far as, going into my own life. But there were so many moments where, through this spiritual process of dedication, and I'm no yogi, I'm no guru, I'm no saint or anything like that. I'm just a normal guy who's been focused on this stuff for quite a while. But I noticed the time and effort I put in created this gradual effect of, and when you said luck, I'm like, oh, that's my power. I won't say that's the case because I haven't always been lucky, but there is an impulse that I've experienced to look towards something maybe unexplainable that at that time almost seemed like new to me, right?
Mhm.
I can think of one instance where we were in Colorado. We had this big accident with our car, and I found this image of a god at the crystal store that we had gone to the day before, and it was in my pocket. So I pulled it out, and I'm just like, thinking and praying about this situation we're in. And then I go back and I do some research after everything had kind of settled and we had made it home safely. And I'm like, oh, wow, that was the god of like travel, or it had something to do with
Mm.
traveling. And it was just that like instance of, and I wasn't even like particularly drawn to Hinduism. It was more of a peripheral interest than a direct interest. So it was just really weird looking back. I'm like, wow, that entity, that deity was there at the perfect moment in such a subtle form too. Like I don't even have that card anymore. It's like it's
Mm.
actually like one of these types of things. Like I have
Oh,
one of
okay.
Christ here, but it's like yeah, a little religious sort of token. And it was just so strange the way that whole series of events took place. And now looking back on it, it's like feels like a completely different life, and it was only 5 years ago. But yeah, it's very interesting. I think astrology, you mentioned how sidereal astrology is maybe a more sympathetic version of it, whereas the Babylonian zodiac tropical astrology that we get in the newspaper and stuff, this is more like, I don't know, dense, a hardened version of the zodiac. But for people who are completely, new to why astrology matters, like, can we maybe draw a connection to our own physical anatomy and the correspondences, right? Because we have 7 chakras, 7 energy bodies, and how many, classical planets are there, right? 7. So
Um,
there is this sort of correspondence, but how deep does it get? I'm sure you've looked at this at length.
it does. We pretty much follow the ecliptic traditionally, which is the path of the sun. And your sun sign is just showing you how you project your ego to the world. That's all it's showing. And I mean, we live in an egotistical world. So when people ask you what your sign, you're telling them your sun sign. You're saying the sun was in this zodiac region when you were born. But you also have an ascendant sign and you have a moon sign. They're called the big three. Just like on the Kabbalah, you got the big three as well. At the top of the Kabbalahs and triads. And the big three, the sun, the moon, and the ascendant, the rising sign, is showing you how your soul is. In sidereal astrology, the nakshatras, there's 27 nakshatras, And the moon is the main focus here because even in Western astrology, the moon pertains to the spirit of the person, the soul, the deep intricacies of what they are. I've even studied further. It's like a cosmic imprint. You may have been your moon sign a lot of times, and if you believe in reincarnation in other lives, or at least in other, forms of what you are this energy. This is what energy, literally that constellation, like for instance, Porva Falgani. I'm a Porva Falganian, and the deity there is Baga, the god of luck. I've been lucky as well, but my ascendant sign is Parnavasu. It's one of the nakshatras, and it's a goddess there named Aditi. She's the mother of the Adityas in the Sanskrit, and basically her gift is the omnipotential of creation. I'm very creative in what I do. I do it very, very distinctively, and people always tell me, "Well, that looks real different." Like even the shirt I had on, my sister seen me the other day. I had an outfit on with this shirt. She said, I don't know what it is about your outfit right now because it's all over the place, but it looks real nice. It's real creative. You know, that's a DT, in me. So I'm not looking at it from even a gender aspect. These deities are a part of you, and we're made up of feminine and masculine energy. And your rising sign is showing you what specific karmas you came to deal with in this life. By the way, Vedic astrology, it's a science called Yotishi. It means the science of light, understanding how the light of the planets affect and has a connection to everything here. You know, everything is pertaining to a planetary frequency. There's some Yotishi strips that can show you why you have the shape of the head you have and the nose you have. It can literally tell you this is why this nakshatra gave you this look.
Right. Well, and
This is mhm.
I don't mean to interrupt, but you're
No, you go.
sparking a thought in how precise this stuff is. And I think, the average person who doesn't take the extra moment to appreciate astrology and how it affects their life, they might just dismiss all this and say, oh, well, that's just, too good to be true. But there are so many pieces of evidence we can point to. We don't need to waste time doing that now. I'll leave some links in the description and make note of that right here on my notes.
Yes.
But yeah, when it comes to the greater organization of life, it just seems to make so much sense that there would be this time-oriented blueprint through which the energies are influencing us, right? Things are moving in a cycle. We all recognize the truth in the statement that history repeats itself, right? Even in our own small relative lifespans, history repeats itself, right? And I think this may be a part of that, this wheel of life through which all is influenced. And to understand these influences is to have a better grip on how you're going to turn along in your cycle of life, I think, in many ways. But I want to take it back to the bicameral mind idea, because it does seem like this is coached within this understanding of the zodiac. Like, this understanding of the zodiac and the influences is like maybe, in my mind, how we can understand instinctual behavior, right? Before man
Mm.
created this free will urge, and we even, it's debatable how much free will we actually have, because you look at how much we're influenced by these planetary influences, and you're like, wow, how could this be so true? Like, it's almost unbelievable that you're following this path that's kind of, by someone who's aware and knows the science, they can accurately predict maybe where you'll be in 5 or 10 years based on these things, right? So it almost
Oh, absolutely.
seems like this is sort of a part of that idea of instinctual behavior, and then maybe us with the fire of Prometheus, our will burning. I want to give you a chance to respond to that, because that wasn't really a fully formed question, but I also want to take it back
Oh, TikTok.
to the pineal gland concept. And I've seen you break down the crucifixion of Christ and show how it's actually an analogy or a metaphor for our spiritual abilities as human beings. And you briefly touched on it today when you mentioned the Christos. But if we can get into that and how that connects to our conscious abilities, Christ consciousness, and then maybe even where that connects to the whole bicameral mind concept, because I think it is all connected from the nakshatras to the bicameral mind. I think there's a link there.
There is. Let's look at the nakshatras as a node or nodes. The light passes through it, just like the Kabbalah. You see the syzygies of the passing of the light down into, Malkuth, the kingdom, which would be a physical manifestation, a download, like on your computer, downloading the light. The earliest representation of the crystals, which is the light, is I would say the most known, because it comes from way older civilizations, but the most known when people were just learning about this information in ancient times was his name was Heteru. It became later Greek Horus. Heteru and Horus, where you get the word hero from. Then you get the journey of the hero's journey of 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. Is talking about the mythos of Heteru and the psychological aspect of how we're playing this hero's journey, this light journey, because Heteru is the light god. He's born from Osiris and Isis, or Osiris is killed by his uncle Set, which is representative of chaos. Osiris is chopped up into 14 pieces. The only thing uncovered from his body was his penis or his phallus. And Isis uncovered his phallus, and that phallus or penis is the pineal gland. The pineal gland in the occult text is called the penis of God, because literally, when you look at the pineal gland, if you understand physiology, I think it's like within the first 4 months of gestation, the penis and the clitoris looks very similar. It's actually the same thing. A penis is nothing but an elongated clitoris, essentially. That's what it is. So the pineal gland looks exactly like a clitoris. If you looked at it inside of the brain and in the anatomy of the body, these are secrets.
Now, does that give us any idea where or what the G spot is? Random question.
Interesting you say that, because they say that our sexual fluids comes from the spinal cord, from the brain. There's a production from the brain, from the colostrum, that brings it down into the spinal cord, and it becomes our, those fluids. So,
right.
Yeah, there is something to it. There's something to the G spot. Matter of fact, there's a secret mystery. You can get a book by Dr. John Munford called Ecstasies of Tantra, where he's speaking about what you're talking about, how to access the G spot pertaining to the science of the pineal and the brain. But he also is talking about how can a man have an orgasm. See, we ejaculate, but there's an orgasm side, that man can achieve, just as, women have serial orgasms. They can have back-to-back orgasms. We just have one, and that's it for some people. I mean, depending on how, I don't know, your stamina or your health. So,
right.
These orgasms were mysteries of Isis, mysteries of the goddess, because before we get gods, we had goddesses. Goddesses came from the androgyne first. Then it envelops into God. So Osiris and all of these guys were actually goddesses at one point. And the patriarchy, they don't like that. That's why woman automatically becomes the enemy, you know?
Well, this might also shed light on the, you know, secret society phenomena of cross-dressing and how that's kind of made its way into society in not so subtle ways. Now it's a big issue, the whole trans agenda or trans rights, depending on which side of the fence you're on. You know, it's either the transhuman agenda or it's human rights, right? So, but at the end of the day, you have, especially in American iconography, the image of our founding fathers all wearing wigs. We even have the Statue of Liberty, which people say is a woman when you look closer, and it has very manly features. Almost seems like it's a man pretending to be a woman, or in the character of a woman, right? So yeah, maybe
Mhm.
there is this deeper significance to this, that now from our modern sensibilities, what people sort of cliche is like, oh, it's a cross-dresser, when really there's some very deep metaphysical awareness being displayed there.
Yeah, wearing the veil of the goddess, integrating back into the goddess
Mm,
is what it symbolizes. Is symbolizing the male being in contact or activating his feminine prowess within the dimensions.
right.
That's the esoteric half. You mentioned the Statue of Liberty. Of course, there's a picture of Lucifer looking similar, old picture of Lucifer looking similar to Statue of Liberty, but it goes back further than that drawing. I think that drawing was a little bit more up in date. The Statue of Liberty is actually this the son of this trans goddess, the first worship trans goddess. Her name was Kybel or Kybella. So actually, where the word Kabbalah comes from is from this trans deity
Wow.
called Kybella that I speak about. And she had a son named Attis or Atticus, or it's Attis in most texts. It's a Phrygian deity. That's why this Olympics was the mascot were the Phrygians, the Smurfs, the Phrygians or Anatolia, where the first church was, the church of Antioch. It was in this area in Turkey where St. Peter had the first, he was the first one to declare we're Christians now. It literally comes from him, from the Catholic Church. But um, this deity, Attis, ends up having a relationship with his mother.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
And her worshipers, they were all eunuchs. They would have to cut their, you know,
Yeah.
and they were called the Gali priests. Is another word in Sumerian connected Sumeria connecting this. The Galu later becomes Kalu or the Urkalu. Urkalu becomes Urkala, and that's the demons of the underworld. It's called Urkala. Urkala, but they're called Galu, and these people were eunuchs who would castrate themselves to show their worship to her, and they would, wear women clothes, dress like a woman, put makeup on. Like, you remember in the Olympics, they had a bunch of trans um, standing at a table like the Last Supper. You can remember, you guys could look up Olympics, look up the Last Supper. There's a bunch of trans, and the one in the middle, there was this big trans person that has the same helmet spikes like the Statue of Liberty. That's Atticus. That's Attis. They're worshiping Kybella.
Wow.
And Kybella is the Saturn cube. You know what that connects back to with all of that.
Well, I just kind of, my jaw dropped. I don't know if you noticed the change in expression, but you're well aware of my research into Skull and Bones, and I do a whole tour of all the things that I've found in New Haven. And amazingly, there is across the street from the art gallery, which is in front of Skull and Bones' tomb, a bookstore called Atticus Bookstore. And
Oh my
it's
God.
been in my face this whole time. I never thought to look up, what Atticus, because all these things are so subtle. The name of a business indefinitely correlates because in this area, it's all managed by Yale. So like they don't let any business to just open up. You got to be allowed to run a business, and especially one that sticks around for a decade or more. Like they're ingrained in the
Right.
community. Another example of this is Geronimo's, which is a restaurant, and anyone who's has a brief familiarity with the Skull and Bones lore would recognize why that is ironic that they have a restaurant called Geronimo's down the street.
That's
But
sick.
it's disgusting. And, considering that the Native American Cultural Center that Yale has, which is a joke, is also right on that same block. So, but anyways, yeah, there's multiple little things like that, and Atticus is another one I can add to the list because this New Haven grid, the 9 square Saturnian grid in New Haven, everything in it is magical, has some sort of subtext that adds to the whole energy portal that they've been cultivating there. And you talked about this on one of your live streams, how Yale and Harvard brought to the new world and the English speaking American world, the classical literature, this body of esoteric information that they essentially gained from the Moors when the
Mhm.
Moors were in southern Europe. And this is a big part of the whole Columbus saga, which we talk about a lot on the show. It happens to be Thanksgiving tomorrow, so there's some sort of precedence for talking about this topic. But yeah, I mean, I'm well aware of all the conspiracies in there, but maybe we're jumping a little too far ahead in the future. We have a ton of, I've got a ton of really interesting notes. Before maybe we go into the Skull and Bones, Yale, Harvard, Columbus type stuff, I do want to ask you to clarify a term I've heard you talk about before, which is Maatian energy.
Mhm.
Because I feel like this is fundamental to understanding what we're talking about today.
Yeah. So in that video, I was covering that above the firmament, they were doing scientific study of what is actually outside of the firmament, or they say is water, just like what's beneath the ocean. We never reached the bottom of the ocean. And they say it's a similar material. And the material is in physics called quark gluon plasma. And there's these authors writing about this quark gluon plasma. They said it's like the chaos source of what's moving everything out there as far as particles and energy or whatever it is. And it's like the science of the cosmic waters of the goddess. And the goddess is here to balance out the frequency. Their job as the secret societies is to show us the polarity, the dark half of the goddess. So that's why we have more, promiscuous, enticing, the OnlyFans era, it's almost like the women between the 70s to the early 1900s. This thing, women almost look at them as enslaved. They were enslaved by men, and now we're free. But really, they're free into what I call the whore of Babylon, the whore of Babylonian psychos within their mind, because they're producing these whores of Babylon, but it's not a sexist thing. I'm saying of women is more esoteric, of showing women where the energy was directed. The original goddess was called Mayat. And there was a period of time after the age of Isis, the age of Osiris. We had the age of Horus, where we got the esoteric occult text back. Crawley was writing about it, and Kenneth Grant, these occultists that come out of the Hermetic Golden Dawn Society. And it was a time frame when man was going to get the information of Atlantean Atlantean and earlier civilization technology that Tesla, Nikola Tesla was getting on free energy, where you don't need a government to control the resources. You can access the physics and understand how to produce free energy out of your air conditioner. That's actually, I'm a part of a company that teaches stuff like that. Salt LLC, our brother David Rossi at Generation Z, teaching people how to access that. That's the age of Horus, the age of light, but it all amalgamates back into the age of Mayat. And Mayat is this goddess that we see in all of our courtrooms, this goddess of the scales. She's holding these scales. Now, that particular goddess in the courtroom name is Themis. She's a archetype of Athena, but Athena and Themis comes from the archetype of Mayat. Mayat is Isis balanced half. Isis is split in two forms. Her name is A.S.E.E.T, and her name is Nephthys. A.S.E.T is the light side. Nephthys is her portion in the underworld. She's in the underworld. She's Anana or Ishtar, deep in the underworld, and we're supposed to bring her out of the underworld, bring her out of the subconscious, bring the feminine energy up. When it rises up, which is what the mythos of the Kundalini is this feminine energy. They make it a serpent because it connects to Eve being deceived by the serpent, but there's some esoteric mysteries of that. And it rises and it goes into the pineal region, and it's supposed to activate the second brain or the second conscious field of our spiritual bodies. And once that happens, you're now in what's called the Mayatian continuum. Once you begin to live a life off the principles of Mayat, there's these things called the 42 laws of Mayat. It's where literally the 10 commandments come from. You can read it verbatim. You can see the 10 commandments in the 42 laws of Mayat. Now, in the 42 laws of Mayat, it says, I have not sinned. I have not coveted my neighbor's wife. I have not killed. And later historians were interpreting that these people didn't do anything, because if you read 42 commandments, they weren't able to sin at all, from just reading that, but they didn't understand the esoteric mystery. They're saying that this is not my soul here doing all of this. This is a ego, a holographic form of myself. So I have never done none of these things. This holographic form in this body is going through this, but my soul is secured and protected. It hasn't done these things. And that's the mystery of the Mayatian energy.
Wow, this is deep stuff. And I kind of got hung up on the one point you made. I think it's important to reiterate about how, and I'm a man, you're a man. Who are we to speak on what women should do? But hey, we're all both
Right.
essentially from
Yeah.
this metaphysical perspective. And from a reincarnation perspective, I mean, maybe you know something that differs from this, but I'm almost certain that there's no gender constant when you're reincarnating. It's not that you're always a man every,
Correct.
incarnation. So we do have some ability to speak on this as men. I think you make a great point on how women, they look back at 100 years ago and say, oh, those women were enslaved. And sure, you can make an economic argument for that. But
Absolutely.
their response to this, like, liberation is one of chaos rather than one of reform, it seems, because if they reformed, maybe they could take a page out of women from ancient history and see that there were matriarchal societies where women governed things in a way that was holistic and brought
Mhm.
maybe a more sane and healthy family life,
Mhm.
community life as a consequence. I think these are really important
Mhm.
subjects that women, I'm sure, are, thinking about, but this is definitely a realm that I don't see many feminists drawing from, which is the realm of, ancient history and where matriarchal societies have worked in the past. And I don't know if we could speak about Egypt as a homogenous society because there were so many variations of what Egyptian society was. But if I'm not wrong, there was a time when women had more power in Egypt. Am I right about that? At least from the metaphysical standpoint, they were respected. Maybe not on a governing sort of level, but there were queens and just as many as there were kings, right?
Not in Egypt had one pharaoh that was a woman.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, I forgot her name. Very important name. But it had one
Nefertiti.
pharaoh that was a woman, and they erased her. They
Hmm.
tried to erase her when the next dynasty came. They erased her whole history. It started with an H.
Hmm.
Yeah, they started with an H. But Cleopatra too. But
Right.
that's something else. I can get into that another time. But yeah, before then, in Nubia and Kush, actually the first rulers were women. They talk about these women, the Kandaki and these other women. Even Alexander the Great wrote about these women. He said he wrote a letter to his mother, said, "I fear of going to war with these Kushite women because they got these big elephant armies, and I think I will lose if I." He wrote a letter to his mother. You guys look it up. Queen Candace. He
Hmm.
said he didn't want to go to war with those big elephants, these huge elephants, and they were very strategic in warfare, you know. But later dynasties, they kind of made it more patriarchal because they went into the whole sun cult thing. They started worshiping that Yahweh sun aspect and saying that I am over all of you women and the man is this and you are this. And that's how we get into the Israelite type culture kind of today.
Hmm.
The head is the sun, and really the sun is a hologram of your soul. The sun is here to remind you that there is a light in your soul. It's actually a hologram. And I can get into that. That's why on the Visa card, they show the two suns. That's something in Egypt too. They were talking about with the scarab beetle. There's different suns and the different portions of the day have a different frequency on your body. And it's because it's a correspondence to the real sun, the black sun inside of you, which is a whole other thing connected to hollow earth theory and, you know, stuff that was going on during Germany. But what you were asking with the women, there's one thing I would say. Feminism started in 1848. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott. These women were into occultism. They were followers of H.P. Blavatsky's work, other medieval occultist work. They were very much attracted to the esoteric and occult history. And the first wave of feminism was the suffragettes. They were just trying to gain the ability that men had to vote or something like that. And then later
Suffrage,
on, it
yeah.
was about the second wave of feminism was about equal pay, get on the same page with paying. Then this third wave comes in, the second between this, because I agree women need to be paid equally, you know, in circumstantial cases. Because I don't think if I'm a police officer and I got to lift 50 pounds, you lift 20 pounds. I mean, I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with it, but there is a contradiction in that
Right.
of the equal pay. And, you know, I'm not at all sexist. I have a mother and a sister and stepdaughter or whatever. But I just want people to have perspective and not just jump on board because we're in this liberal themed new age era where, oh, you're supposed to be so sensitive and
Hmm.
everything. Yeah, you be sensitive, but you tell the truth. Tell the truth and let people decide. So you get this woman named Gloria Steinem that comes on. The CIA brings her in, and she starts to get into Black women's minds, Hispanic women's minds, all these other. She has this magazine called Miss MS magazine. She has Kali on the front of the magazine, chopping men's head off, and she's the one that spin the block or the barrel on, you know, the gun and the roulette pretty much. And then you later on the government brings in this what's the thing they just took away?
Roe v. Wade and the right to abortion.
Not that government paid housing.
Oh, I didn't hear about this. Okay.
Yeah,
Welfare?
1980s. If you're single, you could get government pay as a woman, but you can't have a man in the house. You couldn't have a man in the house. They would look for a man's shoes. So women would have to get rid of their shoes. I'm talking strictly in America. So they would like literally, if there was a man living in there, they had to get the man had to leave for the weekend because the social worker would come.
Right.
She would analyze everything, and then they'll give you your check from the government. You didn't have to work, as much. This was the government coming in, helping this feminism thing because it was building up to this fourth wave, which is now a man can become a woman. That's the fourth wave of feminism. And women don't realize it's a detriment because whatever this last phase is to phase them out and transfer the rights they built through feminism to the trans in the other people, the LGBT community. Now is going to take over the feminist wave. It's not about feminism anymore. Everybody who's a part of that wave gets those rights, also the civil rights, as well. So it's a whole big occult thing that they're doing with it, and all they're doing is letting the debacle side of what the public sees cause chaos while they're looking at it as worshiping the androgyne that's in Gnostic amplifications before. That's all it is. And the Egyptians were the first ones that were unveiling everything is androgynous. It's a working harmony of Ma'at because Isis is to become Ma'at in the future. Isis is a form of Tyrt, the first goddess worshipped. She's a later form of her archetype. And Ma'at is their final form, which is Zoe in the Gnostic text. It becomes our soul. Zoe is Sophia's daughter. So it's all a working pendulum that swings, but it correlates to everything that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is definitely a topic for another show, and I appreciate you breaking that down and finishing the thought. But fascinating stuff nonetheless, and I definitely think that from there we can segue into the whole Columbus saga, because you mentioned the Kushites and these other groups of people that Alexander the Great interacted with, but for the most part, we don't have a lot of information about the world outside of, we'll call it the Greek or the Roman scope of things, right? Or maybe the French as well. When they started to colonize, they sort of went around the world too with Napoleon, the British, of course. But by that time, it was more about censorship than it was about true exploration in the way that someone like Alexander the Great explored. And
Right.
there are all sorts of rumors and theories and even evidences, to back up some of these theories, that there were groups of people in America, North America, and South America, especially the Caribbean, who were already present from the old world prior to Columbus's official expedition, right? So this
Right.
connects possibly in a way to Egypt, because we've talked about on the show how I think the Egyptians have a story of coming from the West, and maybe this isn't all Egyptians, but a certain group of Egyptians. And we've talked about Atlantis on the show recently with Jack Kelly, who he points to the Green Sahara hypothesis, or seems more like substantiated than it would be just a hypothesis. But this idea that the Sahara was at one point very lush, almost like what we see today in the Great Plains of Africa, central, southern Africa. But if that's the case, then there would have been a great civilization. You reminded me of this when you mentioned Timbuktu earlier, which now is in what would be a pretty remote, desertified area. But if this was, at one point green, this would have maybe been connected to this Great Atlantis civilization. And of course, there's the thought that that civilization didn't just sit on the, eastern side of the Atlantic Ocean, but also expanded out into North and South America, and the cultures that were there when the official explorations were made are somehow remnants of this great old world culture. So where does that fit into the metaphysical understanding that you have of human history? Because I feel like America has, in a way, allowed for this unveiling to happen at a more rapid pace because they weren't able to censor things as quickly as they wanted to in the New World.
Yeah, it's no secret. I mean, people just don't want to talk about it, but some people want to tell the truth that the Moors, they were the teachers of Freemasonry. University of Salamanca out there in Europe. They taught the seven liberal arts. They taught the secrets of astrology, astrotheology, most African cultures, native indigenous cultures over here, going back to the Olmecs. They were mapping out the stars thousands of years, before European explorers or different civilizations. They had context of physics pertaining to star field consciousness, to our consciousness, thousands of years before medieval times, or people that come around and write these books and say, I discovered this and that. It's whatever, whoever discovered it in the new age, they become the author of it, because there was a limiting or suppressing to the public of where this information comes from. But the people sitting behind these meeting rooms and these conferences studying the Olmecs and different African sites, or the American different indigenous tribes, and what they knew, circulating the information around Europe, having these museums, portions of the museum, you're not allowed in it. Even in the Vatican, so much stuff coming from over here. The different, you get the Codex Giga, the strips there's strips over here they have, that you would never be able to see. There's things in the Grand Canyon they won't even allow for you to go certain places. There's a lot of rumors that there's a temple of Osiris and Isis over there. They're talking about a big temple,
Right.
you know,
Well, and not
and
to mention all of these, I've never been to the Grand Canyon, but what I've heard is that all of these different areas of the Grand Canyon have Egyptian names, or, pseudo-Egyptian names, pharaonic, what they would have known in the 20th or 19th century of Egypt, and then named all these different areas. And it's still, the place names are still there. If you go on the internet and look, you could see them all, pharaonic corner and things like that,
Right, right. So it's just because that indigenous people, they were conquered.
Hmm.
Indigenous people were conquered. So the conqueror gets to write the history. That's just how it's always been. Whether another indigenous group conquers another indigenous group, they merge and they become a new group. But that new group gets to decide how that history went before then. There's an agreeing, this is how this history went. So the suppressing is that a lot of these indigenous people had the secrets, and they know they've sat with them. They went to the Dogon, and they figured out the Dogon knew about the Sirius star without a telescope. They knew everything about the Sirius star without a telescope. A lot of books written on it, and some people will come behind it and call it pseudo. Whatever is indigenous becomes pseudo, and it's skewed, or people look at it a certain type way. But more people are coming to the truth. The Moors were the first people to show the Europeans that there was a new world out there. You ever heard of the Pillars of Hercules, called Plus Ultra? Actually, Trump has it in his Mar-a-Lago. Trump is a part of the Order of Saint Tammany, in the Order of the Phoenix. he knows about, he uses, when he says he doesn't pay taxes, he's using Moorish law. When you understand Moorish law, then you understand indigenous law. I study indigenous law. And understanding that the land belongs to the indigenous people. They're called the Royayin is a matrilineal. The land goes to the woman, the indigenous woman, and we're just the representative for her. So it goes back into this goddess concept. And today, you know, when you look into hip hop music and everything, the black woman, melanated women, they look the most promiscuous out of all women. That's how it's made to look, you know, because we understand that. I was speaking with Thomas. Hip hop isn't ran by small hats. Small hats control the industry, but nothing stops somebody like me going outside beating on a trash can and making a song. They can't stop hip hop. Hip hop is, but the one thing about it is it was supposed to become something else by now. It's been trapped. The energy has trapped. That's why it's transferring into violence and everything else, because the energy needs to transform. They won't allow it to transform. Look at every genre that came before it. It only lasts about 10 years, bro. Genres change. It went from blues, it went to rock and roll. Rock and roll came in, went to disco. Disco, you know, it transfers. Hip hop has been around 50 years. We haven't seen another music genre come out of it yet. You know, it just keeps degrading. That's what they want, because it's all about mind control. Mainly, they don't want melanated people knowing about the Moorish indigenous aspects. And if I was the conqueror, I would understand, but I don't look at how indigenous people conquered other people. It was more in a civilized manner than, I'm not going to lie to you if I'm going to conquer you. This is why I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to turn around and tell you something like, you can have this portion of the land, and then when we conquer you, oh, I know what I told you, you can't, we're not going to allow you to get that. Just like with the 40 acres and a mule. I'm not going to tell you that and turn around, oh, you don't get nothing. Matter of fact, we won't give reparations to Native Americans. We do all of this stuff, but we're not going to give you nothing because you don't deserve it, or you really didn't work hard for it. We built everything, or something like that. So it's a very touchy subject, because race was created out of Spain. When the Moors ran out of Spain, they created something, the Spaniards created something called the blood quantum laws. And they were saying, if you had any percentage of the Moorish blood, then there were certain laws of things they could do to you. It's real. You just look up blood quantum laws in Spain. That's what this is. I mean, the guy, Bluebach created race as a concept of saying, you're this, you're a Mongoloid, you're this or that, you're a Negro, all of that. That came from Blumenbach, or wherever his name is. But the actual blood, or that the whole law thing of saying indigenous people has to be sectored out here. You guys be put in the ghetto, everybody else live over here. That came from Spain after they ran the Moors. And you know, when you go to Spain or Mexico, when they have the running of the bulls festival, you ever heard of the running of the bulls festival?
Yeah.
That was symbolizing them running the Moors out of Spain. That's what it symbolizes.
Wow.
That's what the whole thing is about.
Yeah. Now, the bull has some symbolism. Where does
It
that
does.
connect to the Moors specifically?
Does. It's the Moors, because the bull is Apis. Apis is Osiris. Osiris is called the god of the perfect black, going back to dark matter from the beginning. Speaking about, it's not talking about race, but it's speaking about darkness in the concept of cosmology, and how it pertains in the mythos, how darkness gives birth to light. Osiris gives birth, or his son is Horus, who is the light, who is the Christ, the Christos. But he comes from Osiris, the god of the underworld. So the later religions, they completely obliterated what the underworld is supposed to represent in your spiritual journey. There's traumas of life is obliterated, and they just tell you, well, Jesus just will forgive you for all your sins at least 72 times. What do you say? 72 times seven or something like that.
Hmm.
So you can be forgiven for one sin that many times, or whatever, how they put it. But the underworld, the trauma or the sins is coming from the subconscious of how you start your psychological prognostication of everything occurring. The subconscious is the underworld, and Osiris is the subconscious within people.
Hmm.
So esoterically, the subconscious representative of Osiris. And we look into later, way ancient texts, they're saying that there's some type of magic connected to a person's subconscious. This is how you're able to change reality, if you can somehow trick the subconscious into believing something. This is the basis of all the Lemic magic. All I've studied every Necronomicon, chaos magic book there is. Everything goes back to the subconscious. And Osiris is a bull deity called Apis. He's a bull deity, and in earlier mythologies, he's another bull-headed god. The name is slipping my mind right now, though. I can't remember the name, but he's a bull. The bull god Apis is a star region.
Hmm.
Apis is a region in the Sirius constellation, going back to Sirius. And the Moors had all of the information that was burned out of the Library of Alexandria. The Moors took some of the manuscripts into Europe and taught everyone. They didn't look at race. If you wanted to learn, they would teach you. It would sit you down and show you, this is the hidden mysteries, the mystery school is what they called it. And the later Europeans who attended Salamanca and these lessons, they commemorated the Moors, Knights of Templar, and other people. This is when the Baphomet is a commemoration of the Moor. Get a book by Idris Shah called The Sufi. Because the word Sufi, you can type up the etymology of Sufi. It means woolly-haired person. That's what it means. It means a woolly-haired person in its original root syntax of the hieratic convergence of letters. It means woolly-haired person. And in that book, the Sufi, he says that the Baphomet is a alchemical symbol that the Knights of Templars created to commemorate what they called the Negro head of gold, the transmuted man. It means the transmuted man. You see how they put trans in the representation of the Baphomet today? It means transmutation man.
Hmm.
And they made it dark. They made it black, because later Satan becomes the image of the goat. But the goat wasn't the original. The Bible has no description of the devil or Satan. So the goat becomes the scapegoat of the villain, the image of the villain. The goat is scapegoat.
Yeah.
And it's speaking about metaphysical things pertaining to a goat. When it goes up the mountain, a goat always reaches the top of the mountain. When you study, whatever the word is for, how they migrate, they go to the mountain top. That's esoteric. That's esoteric spiritual journey stuff. And there's some other things with the goat as well. But
Well, in the Capricorn, going back to astrology, the Capricorn is at the top of the wheel, right? It's like the
right.
beginning. It starts the cycle again. It's like getting to the top.
Saturn,
Mhm.
Saturn is the black planet. That's what it's called.
Mm.
You get it? Black planet.
Right.
You
Right.
see? So there's a lot of mysteries, but they let the race and the conditioning make things schizoid, and they get trapped in the ego of what the conqueror said.
Mm.
And then, and you know, the detriment is they're not able to expand past it.
Mm. That does feel like the, you know, situation that people are trapped in many ways, particularly those who consider themselves leftists and occultists. They have a, you know, we run into these types sometimes doing a podcast like this, and typically they're so close-minded they'll never talk to someone like me, because I've had a conversation with someone like you who maybe challenges their notions, right? So they're immediately close-minded, can't grow, can't go past that, because they've been fed all this entrainment about, you know, racial sensitivities and all this, when really what we're talking about here, some really esoteric alchemy, and it's been skewed. And you know, melanin is definitely a factor, but the terms black, white, they've been skewed beyond the true esoteric value of these original terms. So when you go to these topics and you dig deep enough, if you don't have the correct context, you get blocked, right? I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's been a big learning experience for me from the get-go with all of this, is taking every preconceived notion I had from school, from family, from friends, and just letting it all go. And
Right.
cannabis definitely helped with that. I'm no stranger to cannabis. Obviously, people see me smoking all the time here on the podcast, but it is something that I think is also inherently connected to this whole saga. You know, race and drugs are these two sticky subjects, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes get
It
equated,
is.
you know, and it is something that, again, going back to like Spain and the symbolism there, what does Columbus do when he gets to the New World? He names Hispaniola, which just means what, New Spain, right? So, you know, he declares this whole land New Spain, and there's so many little secrets within that whole story.
His
And
his 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 captain, his ship captain was a Moor.
right,
If you read his diary, his
right,
ship captain, the Moors were selling ships hundreds of years before Europeans.
mm,
Just going back to Plus Ultra, they proven that the Plus Ultra commemorating the Moors, they knew they were traversing the seven seas way a long time ago, before Egypt.
right,
Even before Egypt, they were traversing, but they act like these people, because they go into the IQ thing. Oh, they don't have enough IQ to build a ship and get from one place to another, or they don't have the IQ to build a pyramid. But you can go to Sudan and find pyramids, not in Egypt.
right.
I can show you pictures of pyramids of Sudan and earlier Kush. But yeah,
Well, and not to mention, I mean, even I mean, that archaeological racist bias was so detrimental to our understanding of ancient history, to the point where they still don't recognize that metallurgy was invented in Africa. Like
right.
it's like they say, oh yeah, they had it in Africa, but it was probably an accident, and we're not going to give them credit for inventing it. It's like so
Mhm.
ridiculous. Meanwhile, there's clearly evidence of sophisticated technology going on. You know, anytime you're heating up metals to a certain point, and then, you know, making composites or refining them, that's advanced stuff. This is, you know,
Hmm.
there's a
Hmm.
racial bias going on. And I
But
think,
that's a part of the agenda, bro. It's a
right,
part of the agenda. And I'm glad that you understand, because there's a lot of people that are very close-minded. They'll give a little bit credit to some things because they don't want to, seem like they're racist or anything.
mm,
But really buried in the subconscious mind of the world is that anybody indigenous or dark are inferior to, in a sense of advanced concepts of things, and even in indigenous people, now at this point. So We just got to be careful and know this is a occult spiritual war. It's not based on none of that. The physiological and spiritual aspect trumps anything dealing with what type of skin color is more genetic than anything,
Right.
you know. And until you get out of that, I mean, you're going to be your karma is going to be more weighing. They call it the Mayat scales. They put a feather in your heart on the scale, and if your heart weighs more, then they have this monster called Amit come out of the underworld and bite your head off or something.
Yeah, that is it's so funny you bring that up because that's in the Led Zeppelin, I forget which album, but it's, one of their main logos that people
Mm.
know them for. And Robert Plant, the lyricist of Led Zeppelin, that was his icon that he chose, was the feather of Ma'at. And I'm a big Led Zeppelin fan, but I recognize the whole esoteric side of all that. I think there's value to it. But when it comes to, the seven root races, I want to just give you an opportunity to clarify, because I think it's easy to conflate that with our notion of race now. We're not talking about race as we know it
Oh
now
yeah,
when we
yeah,
talk about
yeah.
the seven root races, although
Mhm.
there are some pieces of information that might lead you to think that way. Like the Blavatsky stuff makes connections from the seven root races to that blue Bach nonsense of
Mhm.
Mongoloid and on and on and on. So it's a fuzzy territory, and you kind of mentioned how that connects to Nazism and the whole idea of the
Yeah,
Ubermensch and all this nonsense, which
yeah.
has an
Ulrich.
occult
Yeah.
has an occult precedent, but has been taken to an extremist and millenarianism type of bent where they, feel they're responsible for the destiny of the world somehow, right? This is just,
Yeah.
again, going back to ego. But when we talk
Mhm.
about the various groups of people across the earth and we think about the history of the conquerors, there are people who are naturally in touch with these pieces of information, or this perennial philosophy that we've been talking about. Mostly that's what I call it, perennial philosophy.
That's right.
They're in touch with that, and that's why there's this colonialism, this subjugation, this censorship. Some of the first things that Yale and Harvard did were Christianize, as they call it, the what they felt were the noble of the savages, as they called it. Up here in New England, there were all sorts of groups of
Mhm.
Native Americans, and they deemed them all savages, even though those very same Native Americans gave them all this food to get started. Otherwise, the Puritans up here in New England would have just starved through the winter and died.
Mhm.
But anyways, regardless, it's Thanksgiving in about 3 hours, so I figured we should point this point out at some point. But yeah, I think the political use of religion has effects that are so broad sweeping. They connect to this subject, and they affect us still to this day in many ways. But yeah, I don't know. I just feel like I don't necessarily have a question here, but
Yeah.
I do think that it's something we should spend some time talking about. What are your thoughts on what I just said?
Well, I'll be brief. I'll be brief. I would just say, of course, um, there's a book called The Entity in which the Vatican um, had like a secret CIA organization, uh, the longest probably secret organization that does all type of stuff for political reasons and maintaining the power structure of what Christianity is, being the power of the world. Most of the world was conquered under Christianity and built large statues of Christ and these Christianized symbols, to represent the power or the hold that they will have in the future in people's minds of how this Christian concept will come about in religion. Now, Christianity, going back to race, It's the most segregated religion in the world. Think about that. You got black churches, you got white churches. Why can't we just go to church if we're Christians? You know? So it goes back into this thing because this is the way that they wanted it. Christ within itself, I believe, esoterically, is inward. The Christos, or the ancient word is the Kres. The Kres is inward. It's an inward path and journey to become like Jesus, Yeshua. Politically, the church has become a egregore, and I describe this is a magical term from the occult text, a astral group concept that becomes autonomous even after the people who dreamed up the concept of how this being will take its structure in civilization in the world and how its effects will have on different people's minds, consciously, subconsciously. This being will exist long after the people that dreamed it up would die. That's all the religion. That's all the religion is. Religion, the word religion comes from a Latin word called religare. And religare, from what I learned from my master teachers, it means to restrict. So it's restricting you from the true esoteric secrets of your spirit and your soul. People can't even really define to you what the soul is. And all of those mysteries is tied up in the esoteric information. The church is just here to manufacture the regime and the paradigm of the socialism and just back the socialism with the system of if you pray and you go to church and you have it's not even what you call it, I forgot the term for it. It's not even that no more. It's more liberal than anything. They don't believe the traditional aspects of
You're
what the
thinking
Bible is
orthodox?
anymore. Say it again.
Orthodox, is that the term you're thinking of, or
Not
traditional?
orthodox. I was thinking the opposite of liberal.
Oh, okay. Conservative, or
Conservative.
yeah.
The conservative aspect of Christianity is gone.
Hmm.
I mean, there's still people who preserved it. I'm not saying that nobody follows it. There's a good bit of people, but I'm saying that the promotion on the world stage is they gutted what the scripture says and they've tweaked it to be more liberal and more accepting of any type of lifestyle of a person.
Well, and this reflects what's been done in academia with Yale and Harvard and these groups where they've taken the seven liberal classic arts and stripped the esoteric and left that for a select few and given just the carcass of what's left, right? And I think that's happening with our Christian faith. For those of us who identify as Christian, like as you pointed out, it's very segregated, and that's sometimes denominational, but you'll even have churches of the same denomination where it's all white and all black, right? So there are, white, what is it, Baptist churches, and then there's black Baptist churches. It's not that all Baptist churches are black, right? So
Right,
that
right,
kind of gets another, Methodist is another, typically a black church, but that doesn't mean there aren't white Methodist churches, right? So it's
right.
again this whole strange thing where, and then you get into South America, and it's incredible racism that's fostered through Christianity towards the indigenous, towards the environment. Not that I'm one of these people who are tying myself to a tree, and stopping the bulldozers. I think, our earth is a lot more resilient and strong than we give it credit. But at the same time, this
Yes.
amazing resource that is the Amazon rainforest is just being, trashed in many ways by people who believe in this Christian worldview, and this whole misconception that somehow the Bible gives us free reign of the earth, even though it really doesn't say that. This whole concept of dominion over the animals is really more of like a stewardship. We need to be
Right.
in symbiosis with these beings, not kill them all for our benefit.
They've eliminated whole species of animals
Yeah.
They've eliminated whole ethnic groups of people that are indigenous, and it's an egregore, and it's continued to be fed. The next step, transhumanism, is eliminating the human race, transferring us into a digital aeon, like in Gnosticism. We're going to be in a holographic form of a hologram within a hologram now. We're already in the hologram and holographic. They're going to trap us into another hologram.
Well, and now is there, because I sense like maybe some trepidation in that, but also maybe some
Mm-hmm.
acceptance, right? Because if we're going to think about the totality of what it means to be human being and accept what we said at the beginning of our conversation, there was a time when we were, boneless, sort of amorphous, gaseous sort of beings here on the planet, this hyperborean time, as they say in
Mm-hmm.
theosophy. But, maybe this digital holographic somehow leads us to that double spinal cord ultimate human being that you also
Could be.
described. Is there any chance of that, or do you think that maybe the elites are trying to warp us away from that and keep us in this devolved state? Because I do think that is an aspect of Gnosticism that isn't quite clear to me, where the archons do have some sort of I guess, dominion over us, and that's not always for our betterment, right? So it feels like, at least for me, there's a little confusion about the whole like accepting these major changes that the human race is going to go through because it's ultimately for our spiritual evolution, or are there actual forces, operating against us? Obviously, I mean, maybe you don't have an answer for this, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think both sides. We can't leave the mind trapped. You got to consider all angles. See, that's the great thing about being somewhat spiritual, or what I consider a metaphysicist. I'm not going to say, oh no, transhumanism isn't going to allow anything for us. We have always, as a species, surprised our capabilities of what we can do. We don't even know what we did in the ancient past yet, because they're hiding all of that. So I think it could be. I think on both ends, I don't think it will stop the soul for doing what it needs to do. Otherwise, the universe will have a direct conflict with that, and it would intercept and do things to make sure it doesn't happen. So if it's happening, it's a part of the polarity that we have to go through a transmogrification into what we're going to become. But also, the soul is not affected to what if you do virtual reality, merging machine and man, and these things. The soul is sempiternal, is outside time. It's not a part of this structured of um, whole lattice field of physical dwelling. It's completely hyperdimensional. It's beyond this. It's been, I mean, if we've been the soul longer than we've been human, that means the soul has been other species outside of us. It's where the alien concept comes from, because I believe we're the aliens in actuality. I don't believe, I think any alien is fourth, fifth, sixth dimensional. They're coming through us. They're coming to us uh, through dimensions. They're not literally driving around the universe in spaceships or anything. They're coming from something inside of us. When I say the kingdom, it's like almost a portal, a in between field. They call it the Manaxu in some of the texts, where things can come in and out, and they can actually inhabit bodies of different form. They got a new series called Teacup showing that. A TV series just came out with Teacup. You guys should check out. But yeah, I think there's no prevention just because they're doing the Elon Musk thing, and they're about to roll out the robots. They're about to merge man with Neuralink, and you got Starlink out there. I think they're definitely trying to stop something spiritual. or at least control it. But I don't think their efforts will be successful. They may be successful to what they believe is successful, but
Mm,
there's always something, a equation. Chaos physics changes. The equation changes in real time. That's why they can't figure it out. As
mm,
soon as you figure it out, another tentacle grows or another branch. That's what they were shown in multiverse. Another branch grows that you didn't see. So they're not going to be able to figure that out, but they're going to try anyway.
mm, mm. Yeah. Well, and I want to go back to what you said about we shouldn't underestimate ourselves as natural beings because everything that we create we think of as artificial, but in its essence comes from something natural, even if that is just the sheer creative force that a human being imbues into anything it does. But it's something that I think, we can see in nature, like the animals around us. We think, oh, okay, well, we're destroying the environment. I'm guilty of saying that in this conversation. But in the same turn, you see so many different creatures who find a niche. I mean, you think of all the different animals that thrive in our unnatural cities, things like insects and pests. We only think of them this way because, they form some sort of impedance on us. But anyways, there's a lot to be said here, Ani, and I have more notes. I wanted to ask you about baptism and reflection, but I don't know that we have all the time in the world to keep going because we're over our 2 hour mark. So maybe we should plan a part two very soon. We can revisit some of the things we talked about today. And I would love to join you at any point on your show, or maybe we can
Absolutely.
plan something where we both talk about Skull and Bones and sort of compare notes. And it's been a theme for me in my life, and seems to be a theme in your research as well. So I definitely enjoy the opportunity to compare notes there. But as we sort of wind down here, you have a Patreon where people can go deeper with you. Tell us about that, and wherever else you'd like to direct people to buy your book, and anything else you have to say before we wrap up.
Hey, first of all, thank you so much, man. It's one of the best interviews I've had.
Oh, thank you.
Uh, very, very detailed in how you convey the question and how you're very respectful in looking into things that people are looking into, and I appreciate that. I was surprised by some of the things you brought up. But
Thank you.
definitely, we need to do a part two. Very interested in bringing you on. I've been uncovering some new things as well with Skull and Bones, so I would love to touch bases with that. But people, you guys can find me on patreon.com slash THE, the underscore spiritual shade room. That's my LLC business. The underscore spiritual shade room. When you get there, it's going to be called the True Occult Newspaper. It's about 1,000 videos on there, and we just go bananas deep on there. I got a group. Our group has grown over the past couple of months. We're very interactive, whether talking about different spiritual tools, spiritual techniques, growing in your spirituality, going deeper into the ancient information, the concepts that we spoke about today. We get way, into it, different experiences we have. But we're building something that's great on Patreon that I think people should definitely check out. It's only $5 on the tier that has most of the videos. The upper tiers has other videos as well. And we would love to have you guys become a part of our family and delving deeper into these type of topics and manners. But you also can follow me at YouTube, Ani Osaru, same on Instagram. That's the Spiritual Shade Room One, and Twitter and Facebook. Ani Osaru is the same. And if you want to buy my book, it's just a premise book, people. It's an introduction into things, but I'm working on the second book right now. You can go to Amazon.com and you can get the Kindle, you can get the regular paperback version. It's called The Blueprint of Darkness. a premise on the eradication of mind control in a mind controlled society. And I would greatly appreciate if you guys would check that out. And thank you so much for having me today, brother.
Yeah, well said, well spoken throughout the whole conversation to compliment you back because you gave me such nice compliments. I always think that I over ask, like my questions could be a lot
Mhm.
shorter, but to hear that they're detailed is exactly what I needed. So thank you,
You
Ani.
did it, bro.
You have a friend in me. I'm looking forward to our next conversation, and audience, please go and follow Ani. He's got so much more to elaborate on. If any one of the things we talked about today piqued your curiosity, you're going to find a lot more to back it up on his channel. So with that, we'll catch you next episode. And until then, immerse yourself in the moment wherever you are in the now.